This is Photoshop tutorial number 8 and we're going to be looking at selections again. So last time we looked at selections I told you to use the rectangular marquee tool, this one here, to create selections that are rectangles. But the problem with using this tool is that we can only create rectangles. Same with the elliptical marquee tool, we can only create circular shapes. So that's no good when we want to create a selection of this sky here. To make adjustments to it because we want to include this stuff here. Well, we want to exclude this mountain here from the sky selection. So Control D is a shortcut to deselect an image instead of clicking around and stuffing things up. So if you've got a selection, you can just Control D to remove that. First tool we'll look at is the Lasso tool. So below here, this is a freehand drawing tool, and you just draw a selection. Control D to get rid of it. That's a useful tool in some cases, but I mean, you have to be pretty good at freehand to be able to draw what you want, and you're always going to have dodgy bits where you're not actually hugging the line. It's not that useful. Polygonal lasso tool, you're clicking on different points and creating straight lines in between. Again, it has its purpose in some instances, but it's not that useful here. You then have the magnetic lasso tool, which if I zoom in, pressing Control Plus and show you, it's the same as a polygonal lasso tool. I make points, but even if I'm not running straight on the line, the mouse sort of wants to hug that line anyway. So as long as I come roughly along that line, let me just start that again. So as long as I stick as roughly like close to that line as possible and just drag the cursor across, it should create a relatively accurate selection along that line. So that can be useful as well in some instances, but not necessarily that useful here. So these tools are the ones I want to show you. The Magic Wand tool is a tool that selects pixels that are the same or similar color. So, and that's determined by the tolerance. So say your tolerance is 10. That means if I click this pixel here, any pixel that's that color or within 10 shades of that color of white will be selected. Whereas if I was to change this to 50, then Control D, and then select the same spot, I'm going to have that same pixel and any pixel that's within 50 shades of that same color of white. So it selects a larger area. If I was to have 2 and then select here, again it's smaller. If I was to select this yellow part, it only say let's make it 30, and I'll select this blue, that area, black. So again, it's choosing pixels that are within a similar color range. That can be a useful tool if you're working with sort of basic colors and stuff, but when you're working with, like more complex colors that you might find in an image like this, it's hard to sort of get the right tolerance. But it can be useful if you're in more advanced things. Quick selection tool is another useful option. So with this quick selection tool, instead of selecting pixels that are the same color, you're selecting pixels that are in a similar proximity. So Control D. So depending on the size of the cursor. So if I was to have a massive cursor, it's gonna, and I just click and drag a bit, it's gonna select a much larger area than if I was using a small cursor. It takes more drags of the cursor to get to that same point. So this can be useful in this instance because you can be a little bit more accurate in, so say we want to select this sky, that's pretty straightforward. But if you zoom right in and you see that there's dodgy parts where the selection hasn't really hugged where you want it to hug that well. So say for instance, just say you want it to get right in that corner there. With this size cursor, if I click, it's going to go dodgy. So what I can do then is say I've done that. If you look at my cursor, it's got a plus in the middle of it. That means it's adding to the selection. So wherever I click, it's going to add that to selection. But if I hold the Alt key, or if you're on a Mac, then it might be the Command key. I'm not sure, you have to check. But when you hold one of these keys, it's Alt on PC, it's going to change from a plus to a minus in the center of the cursor. If you look now, you can see I'm holding the Alt key and it's now a minus, which means where I click, instead of adding to the selection, it's going to take away from the selection. So I can click here and it takes that selection back. So I can click it a few times, get it a bit closer to that line, and then I can let go and the plus comes back, and then I might want to add to the selection again. So this is where using a smaller cursor is useful, so I can get right in the corners. And once you're sort of happy that you've got it about as good as you're going to get it, this isn't the best example because it's done quite a good job. But yeah, like say here, you want to make sure you've got that included in the selection. Hold the Alt key and just drag it up. Here. So you're happy that that selection's looking pretty much how you want it to look. So now you can go ahead and add an adjustments layer. Let's go with the brightness and contrast. Let's bring the brightness down. And you can see that that mask has been applied. That selection that I've made has been applied to that mask so that only the part of the image that I selected has been altered. So if I wanted to make another adjustment using only that selection, I could either go and make the selection again, or I can hold the control button while hovering my cursor over that mask, hold the control button, and you'll see the option to have the dotted line comes up. That means holding the control button, click on that mask, and now it's selected the same selection that was used on that mask. So it's just a quicker way of doing it than reselecting the same thing every time and potentially not having it look the same. So now I can add an adjustment layer. Let's say this time I wanted to change the vibrance, make it more vibrant. I know, you get the idea anyway, and I'm just making alterations to that part of the image. Now say I'm happy with how the sky looks. I want to make the foreground a little bit brighter, particularly around sort of this area. So I could then again control and select that part of the image, and then I could shift control I, which changes that selection from the top part to the bottom part. So when I have a selection like I have here, if I press shift control I, it's going to choose the opposite. So whatever's not selected, so this is whatever's selected of the image, and this is whatever's not selected. So if I press shift control I, it's going to swap from being what was previously selected and not selected, and vice versa between the two. So it's easier to demonstrate with, like, say, a rectangle where just that rectangle is selected, but if I shift control I, now it's everything outside of that rectangle is selected. Just the rectangle, everything outside the rectangle. So yeah, if I just hold the control button and I'm using this part of the image, shift control I, I've got the bottom part. I can add an adjustments layer. Say I want to brighten, pardon me, brighten, make it really brighten certain areas. So now you can see how I've got, say, this part here looking nice and bright, and some of the water part, the reflection on the water looks really nice, but obviously it looks a bit dodgy around here. So then we come back with our paint tool, paintbrush, black paintbrush, and just paint on that mask. I'm using a very low opacity of 15, so normally it's at 100, right? When I paint on it, it just goes black straight away or dark straight away. We don't really want to do that here. Probably better off starting at, say, 50. And then you can use a bigger brush and you can be a little creative in how you do it. Now, I might want to draw a bit more attention over to this side of the image by darkening that off a bit. So you can see how adding that layer with the initial blocking off the top part and then using the paintbrush just to take out selectively parts that I want and don't want, using the opacity to change how dark or how much is being affected. Yeah, so I want you to do that now to this image. I want you to play around with the selection tools, create a selection of the sky. I want you to add an adjustment layer to just that selection of the sky, a few adjustment layers to get it looking how you want. And then I want you to inverse that adjustment layer, that selection. Use the same selection and inverse it to create an adjustment layer for the foreground, like we have here. And then use the paintbrush tool to be creative and selectively paint back some of the darkness / brightness into the image. Once you've done that, you can export the image as mask 2, JPEG, 1200, export, export, and you're done.